One day each year, only one man. A single path into the very presence of God. This journey was not taken without blood, not without fear, and certainly not without immense risk. If the high priest made one single mistake, he would die on the spot. This was the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the entire biblical calendar. And every single detail of this terrifying, beautiful ritual was a shadow, a prophecy pointing to one specific moment in history, the moment Jesus Christ entered the presence of God once and for all. Tonight we uncover this sacred day and explore why it no longer needs to happen. We're diving deep into Leviticus chapter 16. This isn't just another chapter. It's arguably the most sacred text in the entire Torah. It describes the one day a year when the nation of Israel's sin was dealt with, at least temporarily. One day when the shedding of blood opened a path into the Holy of Holies, the very throne room of God on earth. This wasn't just a tradition or religious ceremony. This was a matter of spiritual survival, and every part of it was a prophetic blueprint, pointing forward to the cross of Christ. So why was atonement even necessary? Israel had a system of daily sacrifices. Morning and evening offerings were made at the temple, but sin still remained. The blood of those sacrifices covered sin like a temporary bandage, but it didn't cleanse it. It didn't remove the root of the problem. The book of Hebrews is crystal clear on this point. It says it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Think about that. The system God Himself instituted was, by design, incomplete. It showed the high cost of sin but couldn't pay the debt. A deeper, more permanent solution was required. This brings us to the astonishing exclusivity of the day. Only one man, the high priest, could perform these rites, and only on one day of the year. When he went behind the great curtain into the Holy of Holies, there was no audience, no helpers. Absolutely no margin for error. If he entered wrongly, if he hadn't prepared himself perfectly, according to God's command, he would die. This strictness reveals something terrifying and profound about God's character. God is absolutely, perfectly holy, and in the presence of that holiness, our sin is lethal. The Day of Atonement wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about protecting humanity from the consuming fire of God's perfect purity. Before the high priest could even think about making atonement for the people, he had to do something crucial. He had to bleed for himself. He had to offer a sacrifice for his own sins and the sins of his family. Why? Because he too was a sinful man. He was just as much in need of grace as the people he represented. This is a critical point of contrast with Jesus. The Bible tells us that Jesus, our great high priest, was spotless. He was without sin. He didn't need to offer a sacrifice for himself before he could offer himself for us. Our high priest entered the presence of God perfectly clean, not on his own merit, but by his own divine nature. Now, let's talk about the two goats. This is one of the most powerful pictures in the entire Old Testament. Two identical goats were brought before the high priest. Lots were cast, and each goat was assigned a different fate. The first goat was designated for the Lord. This goat was sacrificed. Its blood was carried by the high priest behind the veil and sprinkled on the mercy seat, the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. This represented the payment for sin, satisfying God's justice. Death was the price. The second goat was the scapegoat. The high priest would lay both of his hands on its head and confess all the sins, the wickedness, and the rebellion of the entire nation of Israel. He symbolically transferred the guilt of the people onto this animal. Then the goat was led far away into the wilderness, never to return. This symbolized the complete removal of sin. So you have two actions, death and removal. Payment and cleansing. Jesus fulfills both roles perfectly. On the cross, he died as a sacrifice for God, paying the penalty our sin deserved. But he also became our scapegoat, taking our sin upon himself and removing it as far as the east is from the west. Let's go back behind the veil. The high priest would take the blood of the sacrificed goat and sprinkle it on the mercy seat 7 times. The number 7 in the Bible often represents divine perfection and completion. This act of sprinkling blood was the climax of the ceremony. It was the moment atonement was made. It satisfied God's holy wrath for another year. But when Jesus died, something incredible happened. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that the veil in the temple, that massive, thick curtain separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies, was torn in two from top to bottom. God himself ripped it open. Access was granted. No more once-a-year entry for one trembling man. The way into God's presence was thrown open permanently for all who come through Christ. The book of Hebrews, chapter 9, explains this beautifully. It says Jesus didn't enter a man-made sanctuary, which was only a copy of the true one. He entered once for all into the holy places, by means of his own blood. He didn't enter the earthly tent. He entered the real one, the heavenly sanctuary, the very throne room of God in heaven. Jesus' atonement wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a temporary fix. He didn't just cover sin. He obliterated it. He finished the work. And this is why it never, ever needs to be repeated. The Day of Atonement had to happen every single year. Why? Because it was incomplete. The high priest had to do it again and again, which proved that the blood of goats could never truly take away sin. Jesus died once. His sacrifice was final. Repetition implies incompletion. Finality means absolute victory. The cross of Jesus Christ never needs a sequel. His work is done, and this changes everything for us. It transforms our relationship with God from one of fear to one of boldness. The Israelites and even the high priest approached God's presence with terror, and rightly so. But for believers in Jesus, we are given an astounding invitation. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." The very place that once meant certain death for a sinner is now our source of life, mercy, and help. What an incredible reversal. So it is finished. The Old Testament high priest stood trembling before a holy God. Jesus, our high priest, stood victorious over sin and death, then sat down at the right hand of the Father. The blood of goats spoke of a debt that needed to be paid yearly. The blood of Jesus spoke one final time, declaring the debt was paid in full. The way was opened. Atonement is no longer a day on the calendar we wait for. Atonement is a person, and his name is Jesus. You no longer have to wait once a year. Through Christ, you are invited into God's presence always. The revelation of His grace continues in our next episode. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.